Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello and welcome into another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. Today is Monday, August 31st, and this is episode number 257 of the Baseball Podcast. I appreciate everybody tuning in today. Hopefully you had a nice weekend out there, stayed out of the way of the hurricane up here in the Northeast in Philadelphia. We caught a little bit of that Saturday, but overall, compared to what the forecasters were predicting, we actually made off okay. We did have some storms, but instead of all-day torrential downpours, we just had a couple of storms roll on through and ultimately had a nice evening. And then today, Sunday here, the day I'm recording for you guys, it's been a very nice day across the Philadelphia, New Jersey, Delaware Valley up in the Northeast. So hopefully you enjoyed this weekend as well. Got out of the house, were able to see some friends, some family, stay safe. Everybody knows the coronavirus is still a thing out there, but we're continuing to trudge forward, move forward, and baseball is continuing forward as well. But off the top of the show here, I know once again it's been a couple of days, and you may be sick about hearing, you may be sick of hearing about it at this point, but I do want to take some time and reference the protests that took place this past week across Major League Baseball. These were in reaction to the shooting that took place of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Jacob is still in the hospital. It's been reported that he is paralyzed, but that has yet to be confirmed. But, you know, again, who knows with all the hospital attorneys, HIPAAs, all of that good stuff. But either way, not a good situation once again. Racial injustice, police brutality thrown right back into the mainstream, right back into the limelight. Everybody having conversations once again that were very similar to what took place just months ago with George Floyd and the kneeling on the back of his neck in Minneapolis, back in Minnesota. So it's hard for me, like I touched on. And if you guys have been listening for quite some time now, go back and listen to that episode where we talked about George Floyd and everything that's taken place, because I referenced a lot about how I didn't come from that type of atmosphere. So I can't speak to experiences firsthand about what these individuals have gone through. But I've played football. I've been in a football locker room where people have come from all different walks of life. I've been in a baseball locker room where people come from all different walks of life. So I've been involved in a diverse group of human beings all working towards one goal. I mean, international players, American-born players, players who can hardly speak English versus Ivy League players on the same team. And it's just a different atmosphere when you're all trying to come together to conquer a common enemy or move towards a common goal. And I do feel like the conversation and the reaction is heading that way. But the hardest part of this conversation, even communicating with friends, watching other people on television, or listening to other conversations on additional podcasts, however you're kind of intaking your information at this time, based on what I'm kind of understanding, is nobody really knows the next step when you're coming from my point of view. Again, a 31-year-old white male, college educated, really have been blessed growing up and very fortunate, and recognizes that, is very open to the fact that, again, us millennials are much more aware of our surroundings and our circumstances in today's world, especially with everything going on. So when you ask me, hey, this isn't right, we all see that, we all understand that, this needs to happen, these tragedies cannot continue to happen. But if you were to come to me and say, Kev, what's the answer? I don't really have anything for you. As I continue to try to learn and continue to try to communicate, having the conversation is a great first step, but the action plan behind it is really where I think we're getting to. And that's good news once again. When George Floyd happened, I think everything in the conversation had, really kind of ignited itself to be a conversation. Now that it's happening once again, I think people are realizing, hey, a conversation isn't good enough. What are we doing to try to challenge the system, to try to fix it? Is it more training with the police system? Is it more communication within police and, common citizens? Is it athletes, citizens, and police all getting together? Like, how do we use the platform that these players have been given to partner to try to make the world a better place moving forward? Because I do believe at the end of the day, at least the majority of individuals out there, that is the common goal. That is the common enemy. Of course, we want to move forward and leave this world a better place for our kids than it was for us. It's just a very difficult navigation to get to that point. So I'm open to communication. If anybody listening out there has any comments, please write them in the Apple Apple Podcasts. Oh my God, iPod. What am I talking about? Apple Podcast review section. Hit us up on Facebook, Twitter. Reach out. I'd love to have a conversation. I'd love to message you back and forth, continue to learn, continue to have the conversation, because this is a step in the right direction. And as we continue to evolve as a society, we have to have these conversations moving forward, as difficult or as uncomfortable as they may be, because instead of podcasts, I just referenced iPods. So this is a bit uncomfortable for me, and I'm behind the microphone pretty often and getting paid to do it in some instances. So it's a situation that continues to evolve, and I'd love to just continue to have conversations, learn, and grow with all of you individuals out there. But back to getting to Major League Baseball and, their role and what happened during this entire thing. The NBA and the Milwaukee Bucks were really at the forefront of the protests and not playing in the games that they were supposed to play to that evening. This all started on Wednesday, hours after I finished recording for you guys for Thursday's episode. And on Wednesday, there were 3 games postponed in Major League Baseball. It started with the Brewers and Reds, of course, with Milwaukee being very close to the hometown, of which we spoke about a bit earlier. You have the Dodgers and Giants and the Mariners and Padres, who, by the time the West Coast games had started, realized what was happening in the NBA and were able to make informed decisions because people such as Mookie Betts informed them that they wouldn't be playing, and they were able to get on the same page and basically do it as a team by the time first pitch rolled around. Because there were other individuals Wednesday who did sit out, such as Jason Hayward for the Cubs or Matt Kemp as well sat out. And this is a difficult situation for these guys. I mean, of course, they want to raise awareness, stand for what they believe in, but they also don't want to let their teammates down in a shortened 60-game season. And that dynamic in the locker room and that family in the locker room, that brethren, can be a very difficult, water to navigate, especially with these types of circumstances. Because I just talked about, you're going to have people from all walks of life. So you're going to have people that certainly disagree, such as controversial topics as this one, and you have to be able to maintain the common goal moving forward. And the Cubbies, they didn't have any problem. Matt Kemp, he didn't have any issues. We're not hearing anything along those lines. But by the time Thursday rolled around, there were a few additional teams who decided to not take part in their action in their game. So Oakland and Texas was postponed, Minnesota, Detroit, Philadelphia, Washington, Boston, Toronto, Colorado, Arizona, Baltimore, Tampa Bay, and then Miami and New York held a moment of silence before leaving the field for 42 seconds due to the Jackie Robinson Day, which was taking place, I believe, on Thursday, if not Friday. The players have carried over Jackie Robinson Day and converted it into Jackie Robinson Weekend. We'll touch more on Jackie Robinson in a bit at the end of this segment, but for now I want to continue around the protests and the cancellations that have taken place. So there were a total of 20 games missed between Wednesday and Thursday, and it's interesting because this really came from the players. This was really grassroots when it come to these protests and these cancellations. There wasn't communication from the front office around, hey, this is what we think you guys should do, or this is what we're planning on, with certain individual players saying, hey, this is how I feel, and then teams having communication with them and responding, saying, okay, we're going to back you, and none of us are going to play. But it really didn't come from the organizations. It didn't come from the front office. This one really started with the players and almost went up in regards to how it was communicated in the plans for the games that evening. So it was very interesting to kind of see what was going on. And in regards to the way the command chart flowed, so to speak, this leads into our next topic of conversation, which is the Mets general manager Brodie Van Wagenen and the controversy that has come out with the New York Mets and the hot mic. Now, we've had a couple of hot mic instances here over the past couple of days. Of course, the announcer out there in Cincinnati getting caught saying something he really shouldn't be saying on a microphone, and he has been relieved of his duties. And now, in New York, you have the GM communicating behind the scenes with a couple of individuals we don't see on video. But he's talking about all the protests that are taking place, everything that's going on with the moment of silence, what's happening. And apparently there was a discussion behind the scenes about the players taking the field at 7 o'clock, then leaving the field in protest for an hour, and then returning at 8:10 to play the game as scheduled. And this is where it gets interesting because, again, Brodie Van Wagenen was quoted as saying, quote, and I said, Jeff, that's not happening. These guys are not playing, but that's Rob's instinct. And Rob, at the leadership level, he doesn't get it. He just doesn't get it, end quote. And this was later retracted. There were apologies written. Apparently, this wasn't Rob Manfred's idea, and it was actually Jeff Wilpon's idea, who is the Mets COO, brother of CEO Fred Wilpon, and it was the owners that were having this communication back to Rob that they think they should do this, and the GM thought it was Rob Manfred's idea. But either way, no matter whose idea it was, Brodie Van Wagenen is saying that there's an underlying issue here with Rob Manfred. Yes, this is one instance of what's going on, but he basically says he doesn't get it, meaning that there's a much bigger picture of issues here. And he's not the only general manager having this type of conversation around Rob Manfred. Again, we've bashed him, a bit here on the podcast over the past 6 to 8 months. And, I'm not going to get into that once again right here, but it just goes to show you that behind the scenes, this is a look as to how leadership within Major League Baseball truly feels about the commissioner at this point. And then in the follow-up, where the statements that were put out, here's one by Fred Wilpon. I am very stressed and disappointed to learn tonight that our general manager made disrespectful and inaccurate comments about our commissioner, a longtime close friend of mine. I hold Rob in the highest regard, and in no way Brodie's remarks reflect my views or the views of the organization. Rob continues to be a great leader of Major League Baseball, and I apologize for any harm of this instance that has caused Rob. And in end quote, and in that statement, he misspelled Brodie. So you had the CEO, the COO, both release statements and both purposely misspell Brodie, Brodie, as Brody in these statements. I mean, how more petty can you get as a New York Mets organization? So ownership, front office, not on the same page in New York. Clearly there's a turmoil going on behind the scenes, with ownership and Rob Manfred. The owners tried to stay on Manfred's side there, but the front office not really buying it. But just a crazy situation coming out of New York. And wrapping up this weekend, or this first segment here, Jackie Robinson weekend. We touched on it a bit earlier. I just wanted to bring his name back to the forefront here as again, we're getting to the end of this segment, I wanted to touch on some of his statistics. You know, I haven't really dove into them too often, but Jackie Robinson played 1 year in the Negro Leagues. He played 1945 for the Kansas City Monarchs. It was 47 games, 163 at-bats. He hit .387, 13 stolen bases, 5 home runs, and he was an all-star that year. And he only played one season until Branch Rickey brought him over to Major League Baseball on April 15th, 1947. So April 15th is typically recognized as Jackie Robinson Day, but with the delay, the special situation, they pushed it back a couple of weeks, and the players here still on Sunday Night Baseball in Philadelphia versus Atlanta are still wearing 42. So a nice gesture, and you know, the timing of the situation with everything that we talked about on the first half of this segment, parlaying right into Jackie Robinson weekend, just really fascinating and an interesting coincidence. But looking at Jackie Robinson's stats, he played 1 year in AAA in Montreal. He hit .349 that year, so no wonder they called him up right after that. He really proved that he wasn't supposed to be down there for long. So then he played a total of 10 years in the majors, all with Brooklyn. Over 1,300 games. He's a career .311 hitter, 137 RBIs. He also had 197 steals. But one of the most impressive statistics I find here is he had a career 740 walks and only 291 strikeouts. So 300 strikeouts, almost a 3-to-1 walk to strikeout ratio, which would be out of this world in 2020. You don't see anybody close to any of those numbers here, but he had years of 106 walks, 40 strikeouts, 92 walks, 27 strikeouts. He hit .342 in 1949, .338 in 1951, .311 in 1954. He had a career-high 19 home runs in back-to-back years, 51 and 52, a career-high 124 RBIs in 1949. So he had .342, 16 home runs, 124 RBIs in 1949, and had himself a year at the age of 30, because he also mixed in 37 steals that year as well. So really doing it all, really proving that he belongs. And just a shout out once again to a great man and Jackie Robinson and everything he did for the game, and leading to the continued conversation that I'm having with you guys right now, right here in this first segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that segment. What we're going to do, we're going to pause right now for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we're going to dive into these trades. We've had a little bit of action here as of Sunday night, as well as some rumors. So stick around, everybody. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll be right back.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back, everybody, to today's episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. This is episode number 257 here on Monday, August 31st, and today is the Major League Baseball trade deadline. Now, this is a bit tricky because I'm recording here as of Sunday evening. Even though this one will be released for you guys here on Monday, the actual deadline, I have to reference the deadline of tomorrow here in this episode. So by the time you're listening to this, it may be on your way home from work here Monday, in which the deadline has passed and there's been some updated information. But at this point, I'm going to give you guys what we have thus far and the rumors that we're hearing moving forward, and then you're going to have to keep me updated on social media as to what actually takes place. So in order to do that, you guys have to head over to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, follow the GSMC Baseball Podcast, as well as the the GSMC Podcast Network, and that way we can continue to interact, continue to converse about the trade deadline here. But as of Sunday night here, we've had 4 or 5 deals today that we can talk about, a bit of a slower deadline. That was to be anticipated for a couple of different reasons. First, the pandemic, the economic situation, the money that is involved with what's going on. The fact that you're only going to get guys for 27 or 30 games if you trade for them right now, and they're a rental player who's going to be a free agent. The fact that people only on the 60-man taxi squad can actually get traded. You're not allowed to trade that single A arm, that lottery ticket that people are looking for moving forward. So they got to be on the 60-man. You got to worry about money. It's a shortened season. Do you get a rental? If it's a pitcher, that's only 5 starts, 6 starts tops that you're going for. If you don't make the playoffs, is it really worth giving up a prospect for 5 starts? I don't really know. But now on top of that, what I'm hearing from within baseball right now is that with all of this social injustice, police brutality going on as well, a lot of the front office hasn't been able to have dialogue about potential trades because they're communicating internally with the players, the staff, the front office, everybody into what are next steps in regards to this movement, of these protests, of Black Lives Matter. Let's have conversations, like I said, about implementing actual, whether it's laws, rules, I don't know what it is, but to having next steps. So they're having these internal conversations and can't communicate with other teams about potential trades. So not only is it the pandemic and the chaos that is 2020, well, now you have this going on at the same time, and it's really limited communications from team to team. But having said that, we have had 4 or 5 deals here in the past 24 hours or so. We'll run through them here efficiently for you guys. The Padres have been busy. They are one of the busier teams. They acquired reliever Trevor Rosenthal from the Kansas City Royals in a deal that sent outfield prospect Edward Olivares and a player to be named later to the Royals. Rosenthal was arguably the best reliever on the market, and he should provide instant value to San Diego. He has 7 saves and a 3.29 ERA this year in Kansas City, and he'll certainly help out a bullpen in San Diego that could really use some assistance out there. But San Diego wasn't done just after this first move. They actually added first baseman Mitch Moreland from the Boston Red Sox as well. They gave up minor leaguers Jason Rosario and Hudson Potts back to Boston in the deal for Mitch Moreland, and the Padres offense gets even better. And that's a scary thought for the rest of the National League. I mean, the Dodgers will probably win the National League West still, but the rest of the conference, I don't know. It doesn't seem to be as deep. Atlanta has trouble. Are the Cubs really that good? Could it really be a race for that number 2 slot? So San Diego gets Mitch Moreland. He's hitting 328, slash line of 328, 430, 746 with Boston. His OPS of 1,176 is second in the majors, only behind Juan Soto. He's a solid defender. Yes, they have Eric Hosmer at first base, so you'll probably see Mitch Moreland be the everyday designated hitter. He also brings some of a veteran presence to a relatively young team. I mean, he's had playoff experience. He's been to 3 World Series in Boston, Mitch Moreland has. So bringing that type of flavor to San Diego to continue to groom the likes of Fernando Tatis Jr. and the other young kids they have, it's going to be a lot of fun. Now, San Diego also has one of the deepest farm systems in the game, so they have room to deal these types of prospects. Like I said, a total of 4 prospects for a couple of return guys at the big league level. But I'm in favor of San Diego taking a shot for it and taking a run at it here because they're a year ahead of schedule. And like I said, if you look at the rest of the National League, you're looking at those other divisions. Cardinals, Cubs, are they that good? The Phillies, the Nationals, the Mets, the Marlins. I mean, you got the Braves, Dodgers, and, really the Padres right now as those top 3. And the Padres are better today after making these trades than they were yesterday. So if you're a Padres fan, I think you should be excited currently about what's taking place and the moves they're making here at the end of the month. But continuing around, the Chicago Cubs made a move. Like I said, are they buyers? Are they sellers? So far, they have been buyers, but nothing extreme. They added outfielder Jose Martinez from the Tampa Bay Rays. The Rays are going to receive 2 players to be named later and or cash. So basically, the Rays gave up Martinez, and we said, hey, we'll figure it out when we're allowed to trade more than 60 actual people. We'll get back together and figure out what the compensation's going to be. So Martinez, a pretty one-dimensional player, which really kind of puts him out of favor down there in Tampa Bay. They like people who can do a lot of different things, but he is pretty much a right-handed power hitter, and that's really what the Cubs are looking for. Martinez has hit left-handed pitching over 300 in his 5 seasons in the big leagues, so that'll be a welcome addition to the lineup there on the north side of Chicago. They've mainly alternated Contreras and Cartini at the DH spot when someone's not catching. So Martinez, even though he struggles a bit defensively out in the outfield, he could be the full-time DH in Chicago. And this is a move that they made similarly of last year for Castellanos from the White Sox. They're really looking to fill that DH role because they haven't had success there recently. Let's see. The Rockies and Orioles made a trade. The Rockies added relief pitcher Michael Givens from Baltimore. Baltimore added in return minor league infielder Tyler Nevin and Taron Vavra, plus a player to be named later. So, like the Padres, the Rockies actually find themselves in playoff position, but they always could use relief help. Anytime you're playing your games in Mile High Stadium out there in Denver with the ball flying out of the park, nobody is ever out of it. And you could always look to improve the bullpen if you're Colorado, because they have the 3rd worst bullpen ERA in the majors right now as well at 5.81. So Givens should provide some stability back there. It should kind of filter everybody down into their roles because he's having a fantastic year. Givens, 30 years old. He is a 1.38 ERA with 19 strikeouts over 13 innings. He hasn't had a save chance in Baltimore this year after getting 11 last year. So he may be in the mix for save opportunities out there in Colorado, depending on how they want to leverage him. And if he gets the 9th inning role, like I said, you kind of filter everybody down one slot. It kind of eases the tension on each individual role, and guys become more comfortable, more confident, and that one move actually improves your bullpen all the way down the ladder as opposed to just one guy being able to get 3 outs. It has that effect with the rest of the bullpen out in Colorado. Honestly, I was hoping the Phillies would take a run at Michael Givens the way their bullpen's been performing, but Colorado stepped up and ultimately paid the price. The last trade we have to report here thus far on Sunday, the Atlanta Braves, they picked up a left-handed starter from the Baltimore Orioles as well. The Orioles remain sellers. They remain to, look into the future and not just jump on this 15-15 start that they've had here and a chance to make the postseason. There were talks of, are they going to be buyers? Are they going to jump? Or are they going to continue to trek forward and go on the path that they've been on? Well, we've certainly found out it is the latter with them trading Tommy Milone and Michael Givens here on Sunday. The Braves in return sent 2 players to be named later. So over the course of these 2 trades, Baltimore will add 4 more guys to their lottery system or their minor league system that they're hoping they can hit on, because again, they are open for business in Baltimore. Malone, he's a classic lefty. Crafty, not gonna blow anything by you. His stuff isn't outstanding. Let's see, this season 6 starts, 3.99 ERA. His strikeout rate is a bit up over his career. So if you're Atlanta, you would like to work off of that, continue to miss bats, miss barrels, and you think with a better defensive team behind him, a better overall clubhouse vibe, potentially he builds off of that and he could be a difference maker for you down the stretch here. So those are the completed trades that we've had as of time of recording here on Sunday night, but the rumors, they're running wild. And this is where I'm going to ask you guys to check back in, or if you hear something over the next 5 minutes and it's been updated, forgive me. Fast forward to the next segment, about 5 minutes here. Look down and click on that. But Joey Gallo is the biggest name that we're hearing potentially to be discussed out of Texas and the Rangers. Let's see. Who could he potentially go to? We're hearing the Indians, the White Sox, not the Diamondbacks. Who out west there? Besides the Rockies could potentially look to add Joey Gallo as 3 potential teams, but the price is extremely high. However, his teammate, Lance Lynn, holds the keys to the deadline, quote unquote, and is more and more likely to be moved. So rumors have it that Lynn will be on the move. I haven't heard any possible destinations. I think he's the biggest guy on the market, the biggest impact potential in regards to, a 500 team potentially winning a first or second round in regards to the postseason. I don't think the Phillies are in on it, but if you're the Phils and you run out Nola, Wheeler, and Lynn, that's a pretty solid top 3. So I don't know what they're going to need to move on from him. Philadelphia made a curious move of adding Mickey Moniak to the 60-man player pool here on Sunday, the day before the trade deadline. Just coincidentally, once again, players only on the 60-man can be moved. So he's coming back from an injury. It just happens to overlap with the trade deadline, of course, is the communication from the team thus far. But if you put on your detective glasses, you can see there that timing may be a little bit tricky. But Joey Gallo, ultimately, I do not think he gets moved. Lance Lynn does get moved, in my opinion. I don't know where he's headed at this point, but I think you're going to see him change uniforms here. Next up, we have Josh Hader. Apparently, the Brewers are taking calls. The Dodgers are among teams who have checked in on Hader because it's come out. Dave Roberts has said that his team is not interested in acquiring rental players. They're not interested in taking on a guy for a month here moving forward, so you're not going to get the Trevor Bauers who could move. You're not going to get the rental guys. They're looking for somebody who is going to move the needle and has future years of control, which is why you get Lance Lynn, Mike Clevinger, and Josh Hader being linked to the Los Angeles Dodgers potentially as the most active team. So it's going to take a lot to get Josh Hader to move, but in Milwaukee, again, if you look at that team, like I told you guys, I think they got worse from last year. You're looking towards next year. I don't see major improvements happening outside of Christian Yelich. Maybe you move a closer in Josh Hader to get high-level offensive prospects because, once again, if you have a high-level closer, but you only get to him 25, 30 times a year, you can't pay him top dollar because he's not going to bring that much value to your ball club. So if you move on from Hader and you get the pieces back, it could be a total jumpstart to the rebuild there in Milwaukee. Next up, we have the Diamondbacks. They are open to trading. Let's see, Archie Bradley, Starling Marte. Those 2 guys are the names we're hearing most often. Both of them have a club option or are under arbitration for next year, which makes them certainly appealing. The New York Yankees could be involved. You have Robbie Ray out in Arizona as a potential guy who could be moved to the bullpen as he's been struggling in the starting rotation thus far. The White Sox are pursuing Clevinger, is a rumor we've heard tonight from USA Today's Bob Nightingale. Chicago would likely, quote-unquote, likely send outfielder Adam Engel and perhaps, quote-unquote, perhaps pitching prospect Michael Kopech, who has opted to sit out this year after returning from Tommy John surgery. So that would be a pretty high-profile trade there. Clevinger, Kopech, and Engel going back and forth. So keep an eye out on 2 American League Central rivals potentially coming to a deal there, which would make that even more spicy in regards to Chicago and Cleveland doing some work and facing off against each other for years and years to come. That would be kind of fascinating to follow. Boston is unlikely to trade Xander Bogaerts as well as J.D. Martinez. Well, we did talk about how they moved Workman, they moved Hembry, they moved Mitch Moreland, Jackie Bradley Jr. could move, Kevin Pillar could move, but it doesn't look like Bogaerts or Martinez are going to be changing teams here anytime soon. And I find that fascinating in Boston. I don't know what they're going to do with J.D. Martinez. I'm not sure if he's going to opt out anymore just due to how the market's playing out with the coronavirus. Nobody really knows what the dollar amounts are going to be, so it could be fascinating to see. But lastly here, let's see, the Angels. They are said to be active. They have expiring contracts. Or general manager Billy Epler is on an expiring contract, and they are uncertain about his job status moving forward. So you would think he's going to do everything he can to keep his job, and you may see a flurry of moves coming out of Los Angeles here over the next 24 hours or before Monday's deadline if you're catching this in the morning today. But that wraps it up here for the second segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. When we come back for our third segment, we're going to jump around the American League. We're going to talk about the East, Central, West, where we stand, where we're currently at. We're going to do our typical weekly update, but since we got 2 segments instead of 3, we're going to go American League, National League instead of East, Central, West. But stick around, everybody. We're going to jump around the American League when we come back right after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back, everybody, to the third segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. As always, this is episode number 257 of the Baseball Podcast. I appreciate you guys tuning in here today. Here in the third segment, we're going to wrap up this past week, jump around Major League Baseball like we usually do here on Sundays. Only now, since we have 2 segments to do it instead of the typical 3, we're going to break things down to the American League and the National League here moving forward. And I'm going to look at the standings and kind of reference the playoffs a little bit more today than I have in episodes past. And before I dive into the playoffs, I just want to remind everybody, once again, we have 8 playoff teams per league, 8 in the AL, 8 in the NL, but breaking news here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. I haven't heard a lot of people talking about this, but Jeff Passan of ESPN was on the Pat McAfee show earlier this week, and he talked about how he is hearing about 2 different playoff bubbles for Major League Baseball. He is hearing that I think the American League will be in LA/San Diego, and then the National League will be in Texas, with Arlington and Houston being the locations. And the plan currently is for the last week of the Major League Baseball season for all teams and all players to stay in hotels. Doesn't matter if you're at home or on the road, they're going to start the quarantine process during the last week of the regular season so they can jump right into playoffs and right into a bubble-type atmosphere and not have to wait 7 to 10 days to make sure everybody is healthy and moving forward. So the National League in Houston and Arlington, the American League out in LA and San Diego, and then the World Series ultimately taking place in Arlington. Major League Baseball currently has hotels reserved that week around Arlington during the World Series date. So I don't know if that's breaking news, whether you heard it last week, but it hasn't been talked about. Playoff bubbles will be taking place. And I think this is a big deal because this gets to the playoff schedule. And with the 8 teams, it will be as simple as 1 to 8, 2 to 7, 3 to 6, 4 to 5. There won't be any picking or choosing your opponent. I know there was communication about that earlier, really in the springtime, almost wintertime maybe, January, February-ish, where the idea was floated around about the 1 or 2 seeds being able to pick their playoff opponents. Doesn't matter what standing they're currently in. Well, that ultimately did not take place. It's going to go standard 1 through 8. But due to the bubble atmosphere and non-travel, do they play 5 days in a row in a best of 5? Typically, it's 2 days, travel day, 2 days, travel day, game 5 or game 7, continue it out over 7 games. You guys know how it would work out there. But I think it would be interesting to note whether or not it'd be 2 off, 1, or if they just straight run through the 5, since there's going to be no travel and it'll just be, okay, guys, switch dugouts and, you're going to hit second this time tonight. So that really tends to favor teams with more depth if they do not have off days, because think about it, right? If you're going 5 days in a row, you're really only getting one guy being able to go twice, as opposed to potentially on short rest, you could get multiple guys or your top 2 guys to throw 4 out of the 5 games because you had 2 off days in there. Now, if you have no off days, you have one guy going on short rest for game 5. And it would be fascinating, and it could swing some series based on the depth and based on the pitching usage. But diving into it a little bit here on the American League side of things, the standings are starting to stabilize. The American League, it certainly looks like, as of today, I think it may be safe to say 1 month in here, wrapping up the month of August, the month of September left, we know who the playoff teams are going to be in the American League. Now, yes, things change. People lose 5 in a row. People win 5 in a row. We had people do it this past week in the American League. But when you look at the teams, you look at the schedules, you look at the situations, it does seem to be that the 8 teams that are currently in playoff position are the 8 teams that will be there at the end of the year. And starting out in the American League East, there will be 3 teams making the playoffs. The Rays and Yankees are really no-brainers, top 2. It'll just be a matter of if they're first or in second place in the division. Then it came down to Toronto and Baltimore. We talked about it last Monday. Well, Toronto's won 4 games straight here after Sunday night's action. Baltimore has lost 5 straight. Baltimore also shipped out one of their top relievers, one of their starting pitchers. Toronto added a rotational piece. So those 3 teams at the top are a cut above Baltimore and Boston, who also shipped out a bunch of pieces out of town. Now you go to the American League Central. You have Cleveland, Chicago, and Minnesota, all establishing themselves as very good ball clubs. Currently, Cleveland and Chicago are tied for first place. I think you have to put Cleveland as the favorite there, just based on their experience, their rotation, their team history. Chicago obviously playing extremely well, a ton of fun to watch, a heck of a ball club. And then you have the Twins, who are very good, but have stumbled of late and lost 5 straight after Sunday night. So those 3 are much better than the Tigers and the Royals. Now, the Tigers at 500 are still hanging in there, but based on everybody else's record, it certainly seems that they're a cut below the Toronto Blue Jays, who added a piece at the deadline. And then out west in the AL West, you have Oakland and Houston at over 500. But then you have the Angels in the basement at 12 and 23 with really no semblance of hope or being able to turn it around. You have the Rangers, who are 12 and 21 now after a brief push there to reach 500. They had a solid week a couple of weeks ago. And then the Mariners, who are trading pieces, 8 games under 500 and a cut below everybody else. So really the only conversation is, can the Detroit Tigers at 16 and 16 ultimately catch the Toronto Blue Jays, who are currently at 18 and 14 for that last playoff spot? But I don't see it happening. Just the way the rosters are constructed with the talent on each team, I think that's where we are at. So looking now big picture as to how this relates to currently the playoff outlook, your number 1 seed would be Tampa Bay. They are currently 24 and 11, going against the 8 seed Toronto Blue Jays at 18 and 14. Now, of course, these two are in the same division, so they faced off 10 times this year, or will face off a total of 10 times by the end of the year. But you're looking at a solid matchup of Snell versus Ryu in Game 1, Glasnow versus Walker, who Toronto just traded for from Seattle to bolster the rotation there in Game 2. Then you'll have Fleming versus Roark in Game 3. And the names on paper alone favor the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, or the Tampa Bay Rays. I still call them the Devil Rays, showing my age there, being over 30. I'm still a millennial, but certainly, the Devil Rays, my goodness. So the Rays obviously would advance over the Blue Jays to the second round based on the talent, the rotation, and the roster. But it would be entertaining to see those guys face off after facing off 10 times in the regular season. As the number 2 seed right now, you have the Oakland Athletics at 22-12, game and a half behind the Rays there at the top. Oakland would be facing off against the number 7 Minnesota Twins. The Twins have fallen behind the White Sox and Indians into a wild card role. Now, this would be a heck of a matchup. You'd have Fiers versus Barrios, Mania versus Dobnak. Now, Dobnak is a rookie, but he's had a fantastic year for Minnesota. It'd be fascinating to see if that translates into the postseason, or if some of those rookie jitters ultimately catch up to him. Game 3, you'd have Montas versus Maeda, Luzardo versus Hill. And the Twins, like we mentioned, having lost 5 in a row, would lend you to believe that Oakland's depth, both in the rotation and bullpen, would ultimately outlast the Twins in what would truly be a disappointing first-round exit if you're Minnesota. I mean, coming off a playoff appearance last year, AL Central champs looking to repeat. You add Josh Donaldson, you add pieces, and then you exit in the first round of the playoffs. That would be a disappointment for the Twins and the Twins fans in Minneapolis. So they're hoping for a better matchup than Oakland, and they're looking to get into that top 6 of being first or second in your division, because the third place team, the final division champ, is those Cleveland Indians. They are currently tied with the Chicago White Sox, so you could flip 3 and 4 here, but I put Cleveland in the 3 spot just based on years past and how I think they will finish the end of the year. They'll face off against the number 6 Houston Astros, the number 2 seed out west, the last of the bunch there. And this would be a heck of a series as well. I mean, we could have seen these teams in a normal 2020 season after 162 games, and it would have been a lot of fun. So to see Bieber and Greinke go at it, 2 different styles, Greinke grunting at you, throwing 54 miles an hour, mixing fastballs, cutters, 2 seams, curveballs, everything coming out of the same slot, same rotation against Bieber, who's reinvented himself, mid-90s, high spin rates, fantastic off speed. That would be an awesome game 1 to watch. Then you would get to Carrasco versus Valdez in Game 2, Savali versus Javier in Game 3, Clevinger versus McCullers Jr. in Game 4. And honestly, reading those matchups going down the list, I think you're looking at advantage Cleveland Indians. I know the offensive side on Houston would have something to say about it, but people are struggling there. They've had injuries. Yordan Alvarez out for the year. Jose Altuve hasn't figured things out. They're continuing to find their footing in Houston, but based on the rest of the division there, they're certainly a second-place team and a playoff team, but I don't think they're up to the caliber they've been in years past, and just with injuries concerns, I think it would be a first-round exit against the Cleveland Indians if you're the Astros. The last first-round matchup you would have then would be the Chicago White Sox, your first second-place team as the number 4 overall seed. They would be facing off against the New York Yankees. They are, a game better than New York in the standings currently. So they would have quote-unquote home field, or be the home team out in the Los Angeles, San Diego playoff bubble in this instance, or this situation. There would be a couple of fascinating pitching matchups in this one. Game 1, you're looking at Lucas Giolito versus Garrett Cole. Giolito, of course, throwing a no-hitter, which we spoke about on the last episode. Garrett Cole, the highest-paid pitcher in the history of baseball, so that would be a great matchup. Then you'd move to Game 2 of Dallas Keuchel versus Tanaka in New York. Both veteran presence, both a lot of fun to watch moving forward, so a great Game 2 as well. Then you're looking at Cease versus Happ in Game 3, Lopez versus Montgomery in Game 4, and ultimately, if you have Garrett Cole going twice in a 5-game set, I think you have the advantage. Yes, he's going against Giolito, and he's thrown a no-hitter. He's been fantastic this year, but I think you go advantage Garrett Cole if you're getting him game 1 and 5, and he's winning 2 out of the 3 that you need. With Tanaka, Happ, and Montgomery, I think you can put something together. But those offenses of the White Sox and the Yankees going against Tanaka, Keuchel, Giolito, and Cole would be something I would very much want to see this October, this September. I think those matchups would be outstanding. Even if they finish 6-5, I think it could be considered a pitcher's duel in some cases. So that would be awesome to see. So I have the Yankees, Indians, A's, and Rays moving on, which means it's Tampa versus New York in the second round, number 1 versus number 5, Snell versus Cole, Glasnow, Tanaka, Fleming versus Happ. We've seen Tampa and New York go at it, or we would have seen them go at it 10 times during the regular season. We'll see how those 10 games play out, how health is transitioning into the postseason. Do the Yankees have a healthy Stanton? Do they have a healthy Judge, a healthy LeMahieu, a healthy Voit? All of these individuals, I think, would obviously make a difference and could even make a difference in the first round against the Chicago White Sox as to whether or not they even advance to the second round. If New York is without Judge, Stanton, and LeMahieu, I think it would be advantage White Sox, so it could be fascinating to see how health certainly dictates the postseason. But ultimately, I think if fully healthy, it at full strength, even regarding non-season ending injuries, I would take New York over Tampa Bay in this instance, and I think it would be advantage Yankees in regards to that 7-game matchup, once again, because you could get Cole 2, maybe 3 times through the 7 games, and it's tough to beat him. And then on the other side, you would have the Oakland A's versus the Cleveland Indians. You'd have Vyers versus Bieber, Carrasco, Mania, Montaz, Savali, and Clevinger, Luzardo. And after looking at this one back and forth a couple of times, I may go advantage Cleveland just based on the pitching staff. I tend to favor pitching when it comes to postseason play. I think Oakland's record may be a bit inflated just based on AL West competition, beating up on the A's, the Rangers, and the Mariners as compared to playing 3 teams that are over 500 in the AL Central that the Indians have had to deal with. So I think the Indians would be more battle-tested. They'd have more depth. They would have been there before, and it leads to an ALCS once again of Cleveland, New York, and you're looking at health. You're looking at a great pitching matchup, and I'm looking at that New York offense potentially carrying them against the Indians, ultimately too. What we've said from the beginning has the New York Yankees as the leader in the American League. But certainly Tampa has been very impressive. Again, it would come down to health. Tampa versus New York. I think the winner of that one ultimately defeats the Cleveland Indians and moves on. Like I said, I had New York in 7 in regards to this situation with Garrett Cole going a couple of different times. But certainly the American League is a bit more stable than the National League when it comes to playoff teams. And really the only question is if Toronto can hang on and if Detroit can catch them. And based on Toronto's moves here at the deadline, I think they find themselves in the postseason when it comes this time next month. But that'll wrap things up here for the third segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. This is episode number 257. We'll pause right now for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we'll wrap things up today talking about the National League, letting you guys know where everybody stands here currently as of August 31st. So stick around, everybody. We'll be right back.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment of today's episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. I appreciate you guys tuning in today. I want to read you guys a review here right off the jump of the fourth segment for you today. We got a brand new review from Ricky Deg, D-E-G. I thought it said Ricky Dog, but it does not. This was for episode number 251, 5 stars. Shout out to Ricky giving us a 5-star review. Really enjoyed Jack's broadcast. Being a Pirates fan, I totally agree with his comments. I would trade everyone. Trying to get rid of everybody in Pittsburgh are the locals out there. I also like the rivalry section and the trade section. Keep it up, Jack. So, Jack got a nice shout out there. Hopefully you guys are enjoying all the great content from the multiple hosts here within the GSMC Podcast Network. We love giving you guys content every day. So, shout out Jack getting his first review on here, 5 stars. Let us know whether it's me or another host. We certainly appreciate you guys interacting with us. And as per usual, you know the drill. If you leave a review, I'll read it here on the show. Doesn't even have to be about me as a host anymore, since I'm not the only one doing this. I know you guys were listening to just me for about 3 months there during a pandemic, and we had a heck of a ride. It was a lot of fun, but now that we're back every day, baseball's every day, we want to keep you guys up to date. So if you enjoy some of the other episodes out there, feel free to write it out in the comments section while you're leaving a 5-star review. Check us out on social media too. I'll plug that one more time here before we get into the National League, GSMC Baseball, as well as the GSMC Podcast Network. But unlike the American League, the National League is a bit more difficult to figure out what the heck is going on. And more specifically, the National League West. That one continues from Sunday to Sunday when I record here late Sunday night for you guys. The team names just change every time. And who's in playoff contention, who's not, who's been hot, who's not. It is just craziness out there in the NL West. So let's start out there. We'll tell you guys what's going on right now. The Dodgers, they're in their own class. They're at 26-10, and they seem to be followed here by the San Diego Padres. San Diego, 21-15. We talked about it earlier on today's show. Very active in the trade deadline. Mitch Moreland, Trevor Rosenthal, they seem to be firmly entrenched in that number 2 spot. But this number 3 location within the NL West is at 17-17 right now, the Colorado Rockies. But they are 4-6 in their last 10. And San Francisco is right there at 7-3 in their last 10, a game behind Colorado. And that team has flip-flopped back and forth a couple of times over the past couple of weeks. The Diamondbacks still in the basement here, 1-9 in their last 10. They are certainly folding and collapsing, and it is a surprise to see that out in Arizona. Robbie Ray leading the league in walks. There's talks of moving on from Marte, moving on from everybody who is in the last year of their contract. So they are sellers tonight and tomorrow for the deadline here. In the National League Central, the Chicago Cubs, they've hit a bit of a rough patch here. They're 4-6 in their last 10 games, but they still find themselves at 20-14 overall, not in any danger of falling out of playoff positioning, because in second place you have the St. Louis Cardinals, and they're at 12-13. They're starting to pick up more games, playing more doubleheaders. They've caught up to 25 games now. The rest of the division there at the 33 mark or so. So almost a week's of games to make up yet. But their schedule gets busy here as they've been 5-5 over their last 10. The playoff potential does favor them, according to the odds here on ESPN, but we'll get into that here in just a little bit, because looking at the National League East, first place Atlanta Braves at 19-14. They are 6-4 in their last 10, and the Philadelphia Phillies 14-15. They had won 5 straight, but before losing Sunday night to Atlanta, getting hammered pretty good Sunday night, and the Miami Marlins at 14-15. So, how does this translate into the National League playoff picture? Where would we currently be if the season ended today? Well, I'm glad you asked, because your number 1 seed LA Dodgers at 26-10, they'd be going up against the number 8 seed Miami Marlins. The Marlins would be tied with the Philadelphia Phillies at 14-15. And honestly, just because I'm a homer, I'm going with the Phillies. I'm going with them as the tiebreaker in that situation. So that puts the Marlins as the wild card team there at the number 8 spot. In the Dodgers-Marlins matchup, you'd be looking at games of Kershaw versus Lopez, May versus Hernandez, Stripling versus Sanchez, and Urias versus Alcantara. And ultimately, the Dodgers are much more the depth, and they're just loaded with talent. So that's a mismatch between the Dodgers and the Marlins, and you'd look for LA to move on with relative ease there when it comes to the next stage. Number 2, you have the Chicago Cubs. They are at 20-14, and they'd be facing off the number 7 seed Colorado Rockies at 17-17. A game ahead of the Giants. Like we said, the Marlins a half a game ahead of the Giants for a playoff spot. So you'd have the Rockies and the Cubs. You'd have pitching matches of Hendricks versus Marquis, Darvish versus Gray, Lester versus Freeland, Chatwood versus Castellani. And the Rockies, if they get hot, honestly, I think they could press the Cubs. I think Chicago's offense could potentially give the Cubbies some problems. But again, this would be in a playoff bubble location, and the National League looks to be in the state of Texas. So whether it's Houston or Arlington, a bit of bigger ballparks there when it comes gap to gap center field, unlike Denver, where the Rockies offense tends to have the most success. So I do think the neutral site could play a factor in Chicago in that rotation, keeping the Rockies offense at bay and ultimately having the success that they're looking for. So I think the Cubs move on. I think the big difference maker is Yu Darvish, how electric he's been this year. He's been locked in. You put Hendricks, him, and Lester at the top. Right now, Chatwood's on the 10-day IL. I put him in here as the number 4 guy. Potentially, I think he'll be back by the playoffs. So the Cubbies, I think, move on to the second round. Next, you're looking at the Atlanta Braves, the last first-place team here. They'll get the last second-place team, and that is the St. Louis Cardinals at 12-13. They are just behind the Phillies at 14-15. 12-13 is a .480 winning percentage, and 14-15 is a .483 winning percentage. So that puts the Phillies just ahead of the Cardinals, which makes it the Braves versus the Cardinals, where you're looking at Fried versus Flaherty, Anderson versus Wainwright, Malone versus Hudson, and Erlin versus Kim. And this is where things get interesting, because yes, Atlanta's the better team on paper. Yes, Atlanta's the deeper offense. But you look at this rotation and the way things are playing out. And Fried, arguably the best arm in baseball, going against Flaherty probably twice throughout the series. Maybe you split 1-1. Then you get Anderson versus Wainwright. You got to favor Wainwright in that matchup. And it comes down to Malone, Hudson, Kim, and Erlin. And potentially going 5 games going to St. Louis, just as last year in the divisional round. It went to a deciding Game 5, and St. Louis put up 10 runs in the top of the first, and the game was over before Atlanta even came to the plate. It was one of the more fascinating postseason games I had ever seen. So I think that has a history or has a chance of repeating itself here in 2020. But I'll go Atlanta Braves. I think that offense could finally overtake the Cardinals. I think the Cardinals' offense has lost enough that it won't be able to hang around with Atlanta's offense over the course of 5 games. But the Flaherty-Wainwright combination for 3 out of the 5 games could be enough to put the Cardinals over the hump. But we're going to go the Braves in a 5-game series there against the Cardinals. In the number 4 spot, you have the San Diego Padres. We touched on it. They've been impressive. 5-6 games over 500. Adding Rosenthal, adding Moreland. The team continues to get better. They'd be going up against the number 5 seed Philadelphia Phillies. That's right. A team that is 14-15 currently would be the 5th seed in the National League playoffs. The seeds 5, 6, 7, and 8 would all be 500 or worse. And the actual best record out of all those teams would be the 7 seed, who would be in the National League West. So they should be the 5th seed, but they won't because they're the 3rd team in their division, and the top 2 are currently 1 through 6. So this would be one of those instances where it would hurt you to have a great record, because right now the Padres and Dodgers have 2 of the best records in the entire National League, which puts that 500 record right into the second place spot of these other teams. But the Padres and Phillies going at each other, and this is where things get even more fascinating because I think based on rotation, this matchup would favor the Phillies. I mean, the Phillies offense, if you're looking at it, has been top 5, top 10 in 3, 4, 5 of the categories offensively, and average and WOBA and RBIs and OPS. They've been electric offensively. The offense has not been the issue in Philadelphia. The other thing that hasn't been the issue is the starting pitching. It's really been the bullpen. And if they make a move here at the trade deadline on top of the Workman, Hembree, other piece they added from the Yankees who hasn't thrown yet, and I can't remember off the top of my head, I think it was Hill or something like that from the Yankees to stabilize the bullpen, the Phillies could be finding themselves here winning 5 games in a row. Now, having said that, going against San Diego, who may have the MVP of the National League in Fernando Tatis Jr., they have Manny Machado at third base, who's arguably having his best offensive season of his career, at least when it comes to consistency. He's continued to play defense at a high level. They just added the number 2 OPS guy in the entire major leagues behind Juan Soto at the designated hitter position. You have Eric Hosmer at first base, so their offense is loaded, and that offense against the Phillies bullpen would get me scared out of my mind as a Phillies fan. But if you're looking at starting rotation matchups, I think it favors Philadelphia. Chris Paddock versus Aaron Nola, I think favors Nola ever so slightly just due to experience. Nola's had a good year this year, bouncing back from some okay years the last couple of years. Then in game 2, you have Lament, who almost threw a no-hitter earlier, versus Zach Wheeler, who has been by far the top performer of all of the big free agent offseason signings when it comes to pitching. Steven Strasburg out for the year with an injury. Garrett Cole has even been okay, leads the league in home runs allowed. And Zach Wheeler's coming in with an ERA mid-2s, leading the league or in the top of the league in double play balls. So he's been outstanding when it comes to the rotation. Then you would go Richards versus Eflin. Now this is where it gets to what Zach Eflin are you getting? Are you getting the guy who went 7 scoreless against Atlanta on Sunday, or the guy who leaves a fastball up in the zone and tends to get hit around? Because those two guys are 2 completely different players. And then number 4, I have Spencer Howard, who continues to find himself in the rotation, established himself much better last time through with his fastball, started throwing it with a bit more oomph and a bit more confidence. Him going up against Davies. I think those 4, rolling Nola back out there, Wheeler in 5, you could see the Phillies advance and upset the San Diego Padres, who may not be ready to flip that switch and get to postseason baseball, where the likes of Gregorius, Jay Bruce, Real Muto, Harper, all of these guys have been there before, and we able to carry the Phillies past the Padres here in the first round. So this would set up a second-round matchup of the Dodgers versus the Phillies. Kershaw versus Nola, May versus Wheeler, Stripling, Eflin, Urias versus Howard. I think this would be ton of fun to watch as a Phillies fan. Ultimately, it'd be Dodgers in 5, maybe 6 games. Maybe you give Nola a win, you give Wheeler a win, but everybody else loses, and they ultimately split moving forward. So the Dodgers, they advance against the Phillies in the second round, really with no problem. The interesting matchup here would be is who's going to face them? Would it be the 2-seed Cubs or the 3-seed Braves? You're looking at Hendricks versus Fried, Darvish versus Malone, Lester versus Anderson, and Chatwood versus Erlin. And where on paper, yes, at the top you have Fried, where you got to think he's going to win 2 out of the 7 for you based on his performance. But the depth of Darvish, Lester, Chatwood over the course of 7 games, I think could lend to give them the advantage over Atlanta if that were the matchup. It would obviously behoove the Cubs to be healthy offensively, to have Chris Bryant rolling, to have Anthony Rizzo rolling, to have Schwarber going, to have Jason Hayward rolling. Everybody, they would need to upstart and beat that Atlanta offense of, they are just loaded. Acuna, Albies, let's see. You guys know it. It's crazy. I'm blanking here as it's late Sunday night. Freeman, there you go. That's the guy I couldn't think of. Jeez, it's just crazy. But you got the Cubbies versus the Braves. I think the Cubbies advance, and ultimately, as of now, you have the number 1 seed Dodgers versus the 2 seed Cubs in the National League Championship Series. Kershaw versus Hendricks, Darvish, May. I think it'd be a fantastic pitching matchup, but ultimately I do think the Dodgers advance, which gives you a Dodgers-Yankees World Series or a Dodgers-Rays World Series right now as of the end of August. And the Rays and Dodgers having the top records. I don't think I'm going out on a limb as calling those two World Series favorites as the month of August comes to a wrap here. But I appreciate you guys listening today. I mean, I had a lot of fun. That'll wrap things up for the fourth and final segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. But I'll ask you guys one more time out there, head to social media, check out GSMC Baseball as well as the podcast network. Search us wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher. Check out all the other shows within the GSMC Podcast Network as well. There's a ton of quality content out there for you guys to check out day in and day out. No matter what you're into, you can have some quality conversation with some individuals like me, so I do appreciate it. But that wraps things up for today. Hopefully you guys enjoy the week out there. Once again, I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. This is the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Have a great week, everybody. We'll talk to you Thursday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.